Hi, and welcome to Straight to the Points. I'm your host, Courtney. I'm here to help you take your family on amazing vacations for almost free with the help of credit card points and miles. I'm a mom and primary care physician, and I believe that travel is an important way to restore, connect, and celebrate. This podcast is designed for busy people who want to learn how to take unforgettable trips with minimal out-of-pocket cost and don't want to devote a ton of time to figuring out the world of points and miles. I'll get you your first trip booked in just a few months. Let's get straight to the points. Hi, and welcome to Straight to the Points. Today we're talking about how to know if your points booking is a good deal. This is really one of the biggest hangups when booking award flights or hotel stays. What people get stuck with is whether or not they're getting a good deal for their points. Once you work really hard to earn a bunch of points, the part where you redeem is always a little bit trickier than the earning part. That's okay. You can learn how to do this. Something that people get really stuck on is whether or not the deal they're getting is good enough and if they should go for it and spend those hard-earned points. Today we'll talk about how to simplify that decision making so that you can get your first trip booked. I earn a lot of points and I book a lot of points travel, but I actually don't book 100% of my travel on points for a variety of reasons. Some things really aren't available to book on points, and more commonly, certain trips or parts of trips are possible to book on points, but really aren't a great value with regards to the points. I tend to reserve my points for when I'm getting a really good deal on the travel and use cash bookings for things where the out-of-pocket cost is low, or if using points just doesn't make sense in terms of how much I'm getting in value for the points I'm spending. Let's delve in further. We'll talk about ways to take some of the guesswork out of deciding whether or not something is a good value when you're booking with your points. But the important thing to keep in mind here is that actually the way you spend your points is entirely up to you. And if something is a good value for you and your family, meaning you're going on a trip that you wouldn't normally get to without the help of points and miles, or you're traveling for longer or in a more luxurious way than you would without the help of points and miles, then it probably is a good value. You don't have to obsess over the exact calculated cash value of a trip to get good value from your points and miles. So if these methods help you be able to take that leap in terms of booking your first trip with points, wonderful. And if you decide that calculating this isn't really right for you, that's fine too. Your points are yours to use however you wish. When I'm making a decision about whether or not I want to use my points to book a certain trip or part of a trip, I like to calculate what's called an award redemption value. This is often referred to as cents per point or abbreviated as CCP in points and miles literature. There's a little bit of math needed to figure this out, but stay with me, it's not too complicated. Calculating the value of an award redemption is based on a formula. The formula is that the redemption value in cents per point is equal to the cash price that you would pay if you were booking with cash alone and not using points, minus any taxes and fees that you pay to make the points booking. And then that is all divided by the total number of points or miles used. You multiply that number by 10, and that gives you the value in cents per point. This tells you the value that you got from each point that you spent in terms of cents. Let's look at an example here. I booked a 3-night stay at the Hyatt Place in Kansas City when I went to a wedding. This was actually my first real transferable points booking. I looked at my points and had to decide whether or not I wanted to pay cash for that room or if I should use my points. The Hyatt Place that we wanted to stay at for this wedding was $585 for 3 nights. The points booking was 15,000 points for the 3 nights in total. When booking through Hyatt specifically, one of my favorite things about Hyatt is that you don't pay any taxes or fees on points bookings. So the equation becomes a little simpler here. I take $585 for the cash price minus 0 in taxes and fees, divide that by the 15,000 points it costs for the points booking, multiply that by 10, and I get 3.8 cents per point. Now, this is a really good value. We'll talk about why a little bit later. First, we'll just talk about how to do the calculations. Let's take a look at another example. I recently booked flights to Portugal for my husband and his mom in January, and that flight was booked through Virgin Atlantic, and it's a KLM flight. So this was an example of a flight booked through a partner airline because I got a better deal this way. If I booked through KLM directly, the cost was higher in points than when I booked through Virgin Atlantic for the exact same flight. Booked through Virgin Atlantic, the cost of this KLM flight would be $1,018 in economy. This is per person. When booking through Virgin Atlantic for the KLM flight, the cost in points was 24,000 points plus $372 in taxes and fees. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated without calculating. You're looking at how much the cash price is, the taxes and fees, the number of points, and it gets a little tricky knowing whether or not it's a good value once you're adding in having to pay some taxes and fees in cash. I think calculating the cents per points helps simplify this a little bit. So I took $1,018, the cash price for the flight, and subtracted $372 from that because that's the amount in taxes and fees that I would pay for the points booking. I divide that number by 24,000 points, the number of points it takes to make that booking. Multiply that by 10 and you get 2.7. That means I got 2.7 cents in value for each point that I used for this booking. In case you're wondering where these points came from, they are Amex points that I transferred over to Virgin Atlantic to book the flight. You can transfer points from several different banks to Virgin Atlantic. I think this calculation is really helpful for me, especially when I'm looking at booking the same or similar flights through different airlines or partner airlines. One airline might have a higher points price, but a little bit less that you pay out of pocket in terms of taxes and fees. And another might have a lower points price, but then more cash that you have to pay for the taxes and fees. The cents per point calculation kind of helps you even that all out and see what kind of value you're getting for your points. With that said, you may have certain preferences depending on the timing of your trip, what other expenses you have, and that might sway your decision more. Certain airlines, like Virgin Atlantic in particular, tend to have higher taxes and fees than others. And so if I was really trying to get the cost of this trip as close to $0 out of pocket as possible, then I probably wouldn't have booked on Virgin Atlantic. I might have booked with a different airline, paid a bit more in terms of points, but then paid less cash out of pocket. Neither choice is wrong, but being able to calculate cents per point lets you better understand the decision that you're making and why. Now, once you know the value in cents per point that you're getting with a particular redemption, you then have to decide whether or not you think that's good enough to make the booking. Again, your personal decision making will come into play here, but there are a few tricks that I use to help me decide if something is a good deal in terms of a points booking. The first is looking at portal prices. So if I'm booking something with Chase points, for example, or even if I'm using a different points currency, I'll look in the Chase portal for that same flight or same hotel stay to see how much in points I would pay booking through the Chase portal. Often, portal bookings cost more in terms of points, but this can help give you a good benchmark. And sometimes you'll be surprised and the portal booking price will actually be less. Not common, but it definitely can happen. When you book through the Chase portal, the value in cents per point that you will get will vary depending on which card you have and what specific booking you're making. Remember, Chase portal uses that points boost thing where some bookings have a better redemption value of 2 cents per point, and sometimes you're getting lower value. So even if I don't go to the portal to check the price, I know that the best deal I'm getting if I'm using the Chase portal is 2 cents per point. So often I will use that as a benchmark when I'm looking at a points booking. So for example, in the 2 examples we just talked about, that 3-night stay at the Hyatt Place, I got 3.8 cents per point. Once I calculated that, I didn't even bother looking in the portal because I knew the best that I would get would be 2 cents per point if that hotel was on the points boost in the Chase portal. Similarly, with the flights to Portugal, I got a value of 2.7 cents per point. And so this is in general better than what I'm going to see in terms of portal booking value. I'm oversimplifying this a little bit because this is how I actually think about it. And it's simple on purpose. If you want to dive deeper into this, you could look at flights, for example, in multiple portals. You could look at how much cash it would cost you to book through your Amex portal if you have an Amex Platinum. You could look at how much cash it would cost and how many miles you would earn if you booked through a shopping portal like Rove. There are lots of things that you can do, and you can really deep dive in this. But one of the whole points of this podcast is to teach you simple ways to do this. So I recommend just thinking about that 2 cents per point as the best deal you're getting in the Chase portal. And so if you find something that's a 2 cents per point booking, it's a good deal. Another method for thinking about this is using something called reasonable redemption values. This is basically a value that has been calculated by other people out there in points and miles, already done for you, and they're intended to be sort of a midpoint value of what you could reasonably expect to achieve with that specific points type. So for Chase points, there's a reasonable redemption value that someone has calculated. The same for Amex points. People have also calculated this for all the different specific airline and hotel points. So there's a reasonable redemption value for a Hilton point, a Hyatt point. All of this calculation has already been done, and you can quickly Google the reasonable redemption value for whatever points you're using to book. Frequent Miler is a website that has a really good article on reasonable redemption values, and it includes a nice big table that has the reasonable redemption values for the different types of transferable points and specific hotel and airline points. For example, they'll calculate 1.5 cents per point for both Chase and Amex as reasonable redemption values. A Hilton point, though, for example, is as low as 0.41 cents per point. So if you got a whole bunch of Hilton points and you're booking something, use that reasonable redemption value to compare to when you calculate your cents per point. If you're starting with a transferable point, you want to use the reasonable redemption value for that transferable type of point versus that of the specific airline or hotel you're transferring to. Or you can look at both. The Hyatt booking that I mentioned, I used Chase points and transferred them to Hyatt. The reasonable redemption value for a Chase point is 1.5 cents per point, and the reasonable redemption value for a Hyatt point is 1.8 cents per point. I got 3.8 cents per point, so that's a really good deal in my opinion. And honestly, even if I had gotten 1.5 or 1.8 cents per point in value, I would have called that good enough and probably made that booking on points anyway. You don't have to get an amazing, super awesome deal every time you book with points. I usually think about 1.5 as my benchmark, kind of the lowest I'll go in terms of cents per point. If I'm deciding whether to book something with cash or points, and I'm using Chase points, as long as I'm getting 1.5-ish cents per point or a little bit more, I'm happy. That's a pretty good deal. I'm using the reasonable redemption value to decide that. So another really quick and easy way to go about this is if you just decide for yourself, for my transferable points, I want to get about 1.5 cents per point in value or more, and that's just kind of your lowest threshold. This is helpful because it prevents you from really focusing too much on getting the highest cents per point. Some people feel like they have to get 8 cents per point or even higher in order for it to be a good deal. And they just never book anything because they're obsessed with getting a really good redemption value. The thing is, as long as you're getting a good enough deal, it's worth it because you're taking free travel. So I like to use the reasonable redemption value as just kind of a low benchmark to say, if I get this low value, 1.5 cents per point, or the reasonable redemption value for the type of point I'm using, then that's good enough. I go ahead and book it with points. I do get excited when I get more value than that, and I definitely do calculate the cents per point for every redemption that I make, because for me, that's kind of fun, and I like to know I'm getting a really good deal. But if you want to keep things super simple, you can just make sure you're hitting that reasonable redemption value, and if it's at that or above, you book it and don't think about it anymore. The flight to Portugal on Virgin Atlantic, I use my Amex points and transfer them to Virgin Atlantic. Amex points have a reasonable redemption value of 1.5 cents per point, and Virgin Atlantic points have a reasonable redemption value of 1.4 cents per point, all per frequent miler. So with that one, I calculated 2.7 cents per point in value. And so similarly, I was above the RRV threshold, and so I went ahead and booked that with points. You don't necessarily have to focus on cents per point to decide if something is a good deal or if it's worth booking in points, though. The real question is there value there for you and your situation personally? Deciding to book something on points versus in cash is also going to just depend on what's going on in your life. How many points do you have and how many are you willing to part with? Do you have other upcoming trips? How much cash do you have on hand? Are you trying to keep the cost of the trip as close to zero as possible? If so, you very well may accept a lower cents per point redemption value in the spirit of just using as few dollars as possible. That's also a great strategy. It just depends on what you're looking to do. One really good example of getting great value for you personally without getting a great cents per point value is using the Capital One purchase eraser. If you have a Capital One card, you can make any travel coded purchase, including cruises, rental cars, Airbnbs, all things that wouldn't typically be able to book using points. So if you're trying to get the cost of a trip to as close to zero as possible, you can make that purchase on your Capital One card, and then you have 90 days to erase that purchase using points. You don't have to book through a specific portal or anything fancy like that. You just make the purchase on that card and then can use points to erase the dollar amount that you spent on that purchase. This is not always the best in terms of the cents per point that you get, but it lets you get free travel where you might not elsewhere. Again, great examples of this are using this for rental cars, for Airbnbs. I've seen lots of people use these for cruises. These are great options to use points to pay for travel for things that aren't normally bookable on points otherwise. I really want to go on a Disney cruise someday, and I have a feeling that I will be using some Capital One miles and erasing part of that purchase to take that trip. There's really no way to book a Disney cruise on points, and so that's kind of what I'll use my strategy as, because they're so expensive. And while I don't mind paying some cash out of pocket, I would really like to be able to get that cash cost down as much as possible. I'll tell you about a trip that I took pretty recently where I didn't get an awesome redemption value in terms of cents per point, but I still felt like I got a great value with the use of my points. Recently, my family and I traveled to Charlotte, North Carolina with a few friends of mine and their kids. We had a great time. We stayed in an Airbnb, so that was something that we had to pay for out of pocket. You can't really book directly through Airbnb with points. I don't have Capital One points yet, so I didn't have the option of purchase erasing that. That was just an out-of-pocket cost. So I really did want to get our flights there on points. We also did a ton of traveling this past summer, and so I was feeling the stretch of the budget, even though we had booked a lot of the travel on points. Still, the costs of food and all kinds of other things associated with travel were definitely adding up. So I was set on getting this on points. From our teeny tiny airport in upstate New York, there's only one airline, American Airlines, that flies directly into Charlotte. I decided that for simplicity and just better experience overall, I wanted to take the direct flight versus having to stop and do a layover somewhere. And so that meant I was booking through American Airlines, and I wanted to do that with points. Once you decide on lots of specifics like that, I also needed to use specific dates because we were traveling as a group. The more you have specific needs, the less easy it is to get a really good value in terms of points. You have to have some kind of flexibility in terms of what route you take, what airline you take, maybe even what airport you leave from in order to get really, really amazing deals. But if you don't want to be flexible in terms of any of those other things, you have to be a little flexible in terms of the price and points that you're willing to pay. And so this was a situation where I said, well, I want to do this in points and I have to do it on American Airlines these dates and I want to do it in points. So I was kind of stuck with whatever value I got. And I was okay with that. American Airlines is actually a little bit tricky in terms of booking with points, just because they're a little bit harder to earn. I have an American Airlines co-branded card and had earned some points on that, so that was what I was using to book this. You also can get American Airline points by earning Citi thank you points and transferring to American Airlines. Otherwise, it can be tricky to get American Airlines points. You can't transfer them from some of the other big bank programs like Chase or Amex. The flight that we wanted was 124,000 points for the four of us, or $1,674 for the four of us. I took 1,674 minus 22. 22 was the number of dollars that I had to pay in taxes and fees for our 4 flights, and then divided that all by 124,000 points. That calculated out to 1.3 cents per point. That's less than I typically like to get with my points. I'm usually shooting for about 1.5 cents per point in value. But you know what? I was okay with it. The reasonable redemption value for American Airlines miles is 1.4 cents per point, also for reference. So again, I'm a little below the reasonable redemption value, but I wanted to limit my out-of-pocket cost. Wasn't an amazing deal, but I got my family down to Charlotte for only $22. So actually a good value in my eyes, even though it wasn't the best value in terms of cents per point. You do want to keep in mind in general with this that hotel points for many chains are often less than 1 cent per point. And so you really want to pay attention to that when you're thinking about what your points are worth. For example, Hilton points are typically valued at 0.4 cents per point, IHG points around 0.6 cents per point, Marriott points also around 0.6 cents per point. And so that's why you really don't want to transfer Chase points over to Marriott or IHG in general, because a Chase point is worth quite a bit more than an IHG or a Marriott point. Calculating cents per point is a simple way to assess whether a booking is a good deal. Avoid analysis paralysis, get that first booking done, and use cents per point as a way to be confident that you're getting a good enough deal that it's worthwhile to use your points. Take a look at reasonable redemption values for the type of transferable points you're using. And if your cents per point in booking is below the reasonable redemption value, it doesn't mean don't book it, but think about it. Depending on your situation, it might be better to book with cash and use the travel as a points earning opportunity. Or if you're short on cash and you want to get the trip as close to free as possible, then maybe you don't care and you book even if it's a little bit below the reasonable redemption value. Thanks for joining me on Straight to the Points. Thank you for listening to Straight to the Points. If you're looking for more tips and tricks or travel inspiration, you can find me on Instagram at straighttothepoints.podcast. If you have any questions about earning or using your points, send me an email. I might include your question on a future episode. You can reach me at straighttothepoints.podcast@gmail.com. Please also send me your points success stories. I would love to hear from you. If you are thinking about applying for a points earning credit card, I would appreciate you using my referral links to sign up. Head to straighttothepointspodcast.com and click on card referral links. If you are getting value from this podcast, I would be so happy if you would leave me a 5-star review and a comment wherever you listen. If you want to further support the podcast, click on support on the website main menu, where there is a link to my Buy Me a Coffee account where you can leave me a tip to help support the podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Straight to the Points.